Mayor Carlett.
Here.
Vice Mayor Binsbacher.
Here.
Councilmember Patena.
Here.
Councilmember Edwards.
Here.
Councilmember Finn.
Here.
Councilmember Hunt.
Here.
Councilmember Leone.
Here.
Council Liaison Bowden.
Here. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the special study session of April 5th, 2016. The first item on our study session agenda tonight is the Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee findings and recommendations. Mr. Swenson?
Thank you, Mayor Carlett and council members. Well, as the mayor just said, it's the recommendations from the Ad Hoc Charter Committee this evening. And of course, that's a very important element in the council's work plan and the staff's work plan for this year. Reviewing the city's charter has been something that's been a high priority for the council and staff for some time. And you put together an outstanding committee to do just that. Terry Ellis, who chaired the committee, will make a presentation in a minute, but I also want to recognize Tammy Shreve, who staffed the committee and did an outstanding job working with what was an outstanding committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chairman Ellis. Terry?
Good afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and the opportunity to serve on a charter review. It's a rare thing. I've worked for cities my entire career. I've had a chance to do this. This was a fun one. I'd like to introduce our committee, starting with our vice chair on my left, Joel Rue. I think probably all of you know him. He was on the city council in the 90s. I'd like to introduce, I think, most of our committees here. I'd like to ask them if they would remain standing until we've named everyone. Our secretary, Brad Schaefer. Susan Churches is a member. She was not able to make it tonight. John Durbin, Brian Greathouse, Mike Gross, Mike Heath, and Ben Snow. I don't know how many of them stood up, but thank you. Yeah, it's good group. And you folks selected these people, and I have to tell you, it was a really, really good committee. Diverse backgrounds. All these people are really sharp, and they played well with others. So it was, we made a good process out of it. Our assignment, as you know, was to review the charter and make recommendations to you for possible changes and updates. As you know, the charter was first adopted in 1983. There have been amendments over the years that go to the ballot, but there was not a comprehensive review until 1992, and then today. So that's been 24 years. So the timing was good to do this. A few things about the committee process, what we did and how we did it. We went through the charter article by article, line by line. And in some cases, there was a staff recommendation. We asked the staff to explain what they thought, and then the committee deliberated. And for every change that was proposed, even if it was one word, we voted on it. So for every change, whether it was substantive or small, it was a motion, a second, discussion, and then we voted. So that's the cumulative work of all of those votes. When we finished, we went back and started over again and went through again. And we looked at all the decisions, in our case, recommendations to you that we had made and said, are we sure about this? Is this what we really want to do? So we took stock of those one more time. At the same time, we classified them into two different categories. One was prominent changes, which are policy changes, really substantive changes. And the other one was administrative changes. The policy changes, prominent changes were, again, a change in policy, how you do something. The law could have changed, and you may not be able to do something that was stated in the charter. The other thing was looking for best practices. This is a really good city, and it's known as a high-performance city, so this committee was always looking for some way to do something better. And in fact, I'll share a little story with you. When I was city manager, I was talking to a council member from another city, and she asked me, she says, do you know how your city is viewed by other cities? And I went, How? And she says, Peoria is viewed as a city that always does things right. Wow. So that's what you get with being a high-performance city. So the committee brought that spirit to reviewing the charter to see if there were ways that we could improve the performance of the city. Best practice is the word of art. The administrative changes was where everything else went that we didn't think was really important. There was terminology. There are things in there that have old-fashioned wording. I mean, when was the last time we referred to our house as our place of abode, you know? And there were technical things that the city does that had old terminology, like it referred to the city will keep a journal of its actions and so forth. No one has kept a journal in a long time. We keep minutes, and that's how we refer to it, and that's what state law says. There were some outdated practices, too. When I say practices, the way we do things, there's a section in here about accounting. It talks about a form of accounting that nobody does anymore. So there was some of that, and there was also some of the language for the original implementation of the charter. Talked about dates when you do this and so forth. It seems like, you know, we're beyond that. So in a cleanup, that seemed like a good thing to take care of. So we were able to do this. The charter's 40 pages. The good news is a fair amount of the charter was still valid and still relevant. So we were able to focus on the things which needed change. And the other thing is to repeat what Carl said. You had real good staff support on this, because one of the issues you get into in a process like this is how do you grapple with this? How do you do this? So the staff, and there were a number of staff, and Tammy was the trail boss on this, of how to organize the information so that you can deal with it, and kept us moving along. So at this point, Tammy's going to summarize the big proposals, changes. We also have the administrative ones, which we can talk about it, you know, at your pleasure. So, and then afterwards, Joe and I are here to answer questions on behalf of the committee, and you've got all your staff here. So, Tammy.
Thank you. Trail boss, I like that. Say, I'm going to, in my presentation today, I'm going to do 4 things. I'm going to identify the issue that the committee felt was important to express. I'm going to explain the committee's recommended change. I'll show you the proposed language as it could appear in the charter. And then we'd like to open it up for questions for each issue that we talk about. A list of all of our committee members. The first item is a city manager's employment contract. Currently, a written contract with the city manager is optional. The committee is recommending that a written contract be required. A written contract is legally advantageous for both the city manager and for the city council, and it also aligns with our current practices. And this would be what the proposed language would look like, basically just striking out that there's an option, and it would be now required. Are there any questions? No.
Looks plain and simple.
Move along.
Thank you.
Department director appointments. The city manager appoints all department directors. Their appointments are subject to the approval of the city council. The committee recommends that the city manager, as the chief administrative officer, should have the sole authority to hire and appoint the department directors. The committee found that such practices are more consistent with traditional council-manager form of government. Although the committee felt that there was a distinction for the public safety functions, given that they have a very broad community role. And as a result, the fire chief and police chief were recommended to be subject to council confirmation as to approval. And this is what the proposed language would look like. Again, the fire chief and police chief would be subject to confirmation, would be approval of the city council. Are any questions? All right, moving along. Indian nations and contractual opportunities with the foreign nation. There's a section in our city charter that identifies the types of organizations that we can contract with. For example, political subdivisions, school districts, and it mentions Indian tribal councils. To be consistent with current terminology, the committee is recommending that Indian tribal councils be changed to Indian nations. The committee is also recommending to broaden the type of organizations that the city may contract with, to include the language, to be able to contract with any insular possession of the United States or any political subdivision of a foreign nation. This would allow the city to enter into a contract with a foreign nation should the opportunity arise. For example, an intergovernmental agreement with a jurisdiction in the territories of, say, Guam or Puerto Rico. Again, this just provides an option if it were to present itself. Here is the proposed language, changing out Indian Tribal Council with Indian nations, and then adding the language allowing us to extend and broaden who we can contract with. Any questions? The next item is the vacancy of the office of mayor. If the office of the mayor became vacant, the vice mayor would become the mayor. This was concerning to the committee members as it does not allow the voters to choose the mayor, especially if it's an extended period of time. The committee is recommending to follow the same charter procedures for the council members vacating an office. So based on the council member procedures and relating them to the mayor's office, if the mayor were to leave within the first 2 years of office, there would be an election to fill that office. If the mayor were to leave in the last 2 years of office, the vice mayor would complete the term of office. This is what the language would look like. It would strike out the current language that says that the vice mayor would become mayor. And this is a couple pages long here, but you'll recognize it. It's like basically the exact same language that's in the charter, but removing the word council member with mayor. So again, if the mayor were to leave before 2 years, which is 740 days, there would be an election. If the mayor were to leave after 2 years, the vice mayor would become the mayor until the term has been expired.
Council, do you need to read that? Do you want to back up and read that?
Do you want to take, okay, sorry. Again, let me give you a moment to take a look at it. It is the exact same language that is in the charter now pertaining to council members. And give me a nod when you're ready for me to change the slide. Good. And this is the second part where we're talking about if the mayor were to leave after the 2 years, the 740 days, the vacancy would be filled as follows. And then going to the next page, the vice mayor would then become the mayor for the remaining time in office.
Vice mayor, should the vice mayor be otherwise?
It's a little bit like a grammatical on that.
The first line?
Should the vice mayor be otherwise qualified?
Just the
Okay,
word
we can take,
"they" needs to be
We will
crossed
take
out.
care of that. Any other comments or changes, suggestions?
Should the vice mayor not?
Not qualified because of age, because there is an age to be a mayor.
Okay, I'm just not aware of what it is.
I believe it was, I want to say 23, but I'm, have to double check. Is it 20, 25? 25.
Just made it.
Just made
got past it.
Just got it.
There's a low age, there's not.
Not a high age, yeah.
That's right. It's just,
We're worrying about the
it's just a
maximum.
low age. That's right.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, any other
Thank you.
questions?
Questions?
All right. Council meetings. This section of the charter requires 3 things. The council must meet at least once a month, that at the first meeting of the year, the council must adopt a proposed schedule of meetings, and that notices and agenda of meetings must be posted pursuant to state statute. The committee recognized that the council has limited flexibility under this current language. The language regarding the frequency of the council meetings is not needed in the city charter and may be more appropriate in the city code. This would allow for scheduling flexibilities as needed for the council. So for example, if during the summer, the council, say, wanted to take 5 weeks off as opposed to less than 4, because you have to meet every month, this would allow that flexibility if the council felt that that would be, a good time to do it. So it gives the council more flexibility, and if it's in the city code, the council can make those changes as opposed to if it's in the charter, it goes to a vote of the electors. Any questions?
So this is just going to be removed.
Right, so
amendment.
as you see, basically the first two items are removed, and it leaves, of course, the notices and agendas must be posted pursuant to the state statute. Okay, any questions? All right. The next item has to do with council roles. This section of the charter deals with, again, council roles. And we want to keep in mind that in the city charter provisions is the institution of the council manager form of government. So currently in the city charter, it affords the city council to a widespread ability to change the organizational structure. It allows the city council to assign additional functions or combine duties of different positions. It also gives the city council authority over duties and compensation of employees of the city. The committee recommends that this section be removed from the city charter. These functions are the appropriate responsibility and role of the city manager as the chief administrative officer. And this proposed change is consistent with the best practices of a council mayor cities. And this is basically all the language would be struck out from the charter. Any questions? The next item has to do with monetary preference for local bidders. At one point, monetary preference could be given to local bidders. However, it seems the law has changed and it's now illegal. So the committee is recommending that this section be removed as it is illegal. The good news is our current practice is not to follow it, but it would be a good thing to remove from our charter. Are there any questions? All right, so again, this is what the proposed language would strike it from the charter. In the ethics section of the city charter, it discusses personal interests of council members, officers, or employees, or whose relatives have a substantial interest in, for example, a contract or a purchase. And in this section, it defines what a relative is. And the committee feels as though we need to broaden the term relative to meet more, to reflect more societal changes. So if you look at currently, it has, basically spouse, children, siblings, and any other relatives, such as persons of blood or marriage. What the committee is suggesting is that we also add language in there for a spouse or partner in a civil union, a child's child, a stepchild of a stepchild legally residing with a public officer, and it goes on to have more, it's more detailed on what basically a conflict of interest would be with a relative. And then it defines what a civil union means a relationship between two individuals registered with a governmental agency or employer as a relationship for employment benefits and similar legal purposes. So again, in the ethics section, they felt that the term relative should be broadened. Any questions?
No.
No.
We have nothing.
So is our guideline that nobody related to a city council person can work for the city? Is that in our code rather than the charter?
Councilmember Hunt, members of the council, that is different from this. This is just in terms of interest of the public official or their relatives in things such as city contracts. Independently, we have provisions in our code where an individual, and we've had a couple of cases I'm aware of individuals who became employed and later their relative became a city council member. But there's a provision, and I believe it's in our personnel regs as compared to our code regarding employment of a sitting council member or mayor's child, and that's different from this. That's not part of the ethics. It's a separate provision.
Any other questions? Okay.
Our next item has to do with public notices and advertising. Currently, the city charter allows only for newspapers to be used to publish notices and advertising. The committee is recommending to allow for technological changes, such as media, to be allowed, as well as newspapers, for public notices and advertising. The use of electronic methods allows for more accessibility and transparency to the public. Any questions? And again, this is what the language would look like, allowing both newspapers and technological advances, media to be used.
So if I understand this correctly, we are changing it from newspapers to any one of these items.
Right. It wouldn't be, yes, it could be any of them, whether it's newspaper or technology, electronic methods.
And so what is the law on our requirements for publication?
Mayor, council, right now, the city is required to have an official newspaper in certain things such as ordinances or resolutions having the effect of an ordinance. Contracts are required to be published in that official newspaper. And the difficulty with that is that sometimes we've had the official newspaper selected off a bid process. You can conceivably have an official newspaper that may not, it just has to be under the law circulated in the city. It may not even be widely read in the city. And so that's the current law. What this would, the city could still have an official newspaper. It would just give the city flexibility to say, for example, on contracts. The contracts are generally, the business entities go to online systems and look up information about prospective bids. Having them in the newspaper isn't really where the bids are. Prospective vendors are going to be looking for the bids. They're going to be looking for different online systems, and this is going to allow for that flexibility. And perhaps the city will just say, we're not going to publish the bids in the local newspaper because that's not where people are looking for them.
Okay, so I think I need a little bit more clarification. So did you say the law requires us to have a newspaper that we
Yeah.
publish in?
Yes, right now the charter requires us to have an official newspaper, and we have to publish certain things in that official newspaper.
The charter, but what does the law say? That's what I'm
Independent of the charter, there is a publication requirement for general law cities. But if this was not in our charter, that would not apply to us unless we chose to enact that requirement.
Okay, so we're allowed to create what law applies to us
Yes.
because we're a chartered city. Okay, that helps, thank you.
All right, the final change has to do with the establishment of a permanent charter review committee. The city charter currently does not identify a permanent city charter review committee. So the recommendation of the committee is to establish a permanent 9-member committee that's made up basically of, consists of the same type of membership as this committee had. 3 members appointed by the mayor at large, and then a member, 6 members, each one representing a different district. The committee would be an advisory committee to the council. If the council wants to recommend a charter amendment, a change, the committee would review it and then provide their recommendation back to the city council. They'd also review any publicly authorized ballot charter initiatives. So if there was a ballot item that received enough signatures to be placed on the ballot from citizens, this committee would also review that. And finally, the committee would have the right to offer a written comment, whether pro or con, to a proposed charter amendment that would be placed in the voter informational pamphlet. And the language for this new charter amendment would look like this, and I'll go through this slowly so you can look at it. This first page is discuss the makeup, the 9 members. As I just mentioned, 3 appointed at large, and the rest would 1 member representing each district. Their powers and duties would include, like I mentioned, they would review any charter recommendation from the council. They would then review it, take back their recommendation to the council. They would also review any charter amendments that have received enough votes that would be placed on a ballot, so they could, from a citizen, so they can, let me go to the next page. So they'd be able to, and number 5 is to be able to provide an argument, whether pro or con, that would be placed in the committee, in the pamphlet, information pamphlet that is distributed before the ballot or election. And again, the rest of the language states that the subcommittee, that the council subcommittee that now appoints committees would not be responsible for this committee. It would be strictly an appointment based on, as I mentioned before, the 9 members. Any questions? One of the items that I skipped is that they are required to review the charter at least once every 10 years.
Council, do you have any questions?
Did that say at least every 10 years, or did it say every 10 years?
It says that to the council every 10 years, to review the entire charter and recommend amendments, if any, to the city council every 10 years.
So is that meant to say that more than 10 years can't go by before they review it, or is it supposed to mean you can review it?
They could review it at any time, but at least from a whole front to back, review the city charter like this committee just did.
Questions? Well, I have some comments that I would like to make. First of all, I want to thank the committee. I mean, you have done a tremendous job, a tremendous service for not only the city as we are sitting here today, but the citizens of Peoria. Our Charter Review Committee has not existed before, and you guys, went through every single amendment, every single chapter, every word, and took it so seriously, and really, it shows how much you cared about the governing document for the city of Peoria. It was a really big job and a tremendously important job, and you took us leaps and bounds ahead of where we might have been with regards to transparency in government. And that is because you, as citizens of Peoria, were looking at it without any kind of political viewpoint, without anything except caring for the city that you live in. And it's obvious that that was your goal. So we just thoroughly appreciate all of the work that you did, all the meetings that you had, all of the time that you took away from your home and your family and your work and your other activities to do something of such great service for your city. So we thoroughly thank you. And having said that, we're probably going to ask you if you want to serve permanently on the Charter Committee because you did such a great job. Yeah, and I also want to speak to Terry Ellis for a moment here. He served our city in a great capacity, putting into place a lot of the best practices that we currently use today. And he did it for 10 years. He has been gone for 8 years, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I've been gone 8 years, 11 years, actually.
He served for 11 years and gone for 8 years, and it took some convincing to get him to come back. And so I just really want to thank you. I know that it was a big job. I know that you're retired and happily retired. So I just really want you to know how much you bringing your expertise back to the city for this important function means to us.
Thank you.
It
Thank you,
means everything. I mean, this is our governing document, and we want it to be right, and we want it to be real, and we want it to be something that we can all be happy to live by. So thank you so much for coming back to us for this moment in time, and thank you to this wonderful committee that has made such a big difference to our city. Appreciate it.
Mayor, could I add my appreciation as well?
Please.
Very, very well said, and I couldn't agree more with what you just said, Mayor Carlett. I had an opportunity to attend several of the meetings of the committee, and I was very impressed with the diligence and the thought and the discussion that the committee members had. It was an excellent give and take, and they took their charge very seriously, and I think the recommendations reflect that. And Chairman Ellis did an excellent job, as did the staff. But I definitely wanted to recommend or recognize all of the members of the committee for their outstanding work. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Oh, and let's not forget Tammy Shreve. Oh, my goodness. Yep. She has done such a tremendous job keeping everybody organized and putting this out in a way that people could actually find a way to function through such a large document with so many amendments and so many words. So thank you very, very much for everything that you've done, Tammy. Thank you. So we are now going to move on to the next item on our study session agenda, which is the fiscal year 2017 budget presentation. Mr.
Well,
Swenson.
Thank you, Mayor Carlett. As we shift out speakers here and we get the next PowerPoint up, and Katie Gregory, the Deputy Director of Budget and Finance, is joining me, and this is the beginning of the next week of budget deliberations that the council will be having. We're back here on Monday night, and we're back after that on Wednesday night, and we've reserved the following Saturday morning if that's necessary. Although the feedback we got after the process last year was you really liked the process, it was done on time. We are taking that feedback to heart, and so you will see that this year's budget process mirrors last year's budget process, so we would expect that given that we should be able to finish in the 2 nights that we have set aside for that, and Katie will go over that at the end of her presentation. What we will do now is I'll go through a few slides. It's the normal that you've come to expect from me at this point at the beginning, where I am formally transmitting the budget to you, and the books, the documents are of course here, as is always the case in the kickoff meeting. So I'll go through a few slides, and then I'll turn it over to Katie, who will drill down a little bit on some of the financial information, the obligatory bar graphs and pie charts and all of the things that you're accustomed to seeing in the overview of the budget. But let me talk a little bit about how we put the budget together. And Katie, I'll probably, oh, you're going to do the clicking? Okay, cool. Yeah, go for it. So while this is a labor of the staff and a recommendation of mine, it is put together in collaboration with you. And it's really the strength of our form of government. We just talked about the form of government in the charter and how important that relationship is between the staff and the council. And I think that this budget is a testament to the excellent relationship we have. We work together on everything that is in front of the city, and importantly, with respect to the city's finances and the budget. You set the leadership, you set the direction, the policy goals of the city. I assemble the staff, we hear your direction, and we implement that direction. And so what I have here is just a couple of the examples of where that occurred within the last year. We had 2 of the Saturday seminars, and that shows as August 29th and December 5th here, but we also had a significant mid-year budget adjustment as well that we did that the council will remember. And in each of those sessions, it was a discussion about the significant priorities that you saw in terms of your leadership and translating that leadership for the staff. The first was in fire medical services, and you'll see in this budget that we are operationalizing the decisions that you've made to expand our emergency medical service and to provide patient transport, which is a significant improvement, as we've discussed a number of times, in how we're going to be delivering that important core service. You've set that direction. We're implementing that in the budget. Similarly with economic development, one of your top priorities. We had a session where you reiterated the principles of the economic development implementation strategy. In Scott speak, that is EDIS2, right there parenthetically. And so that, of course, is the blueprint for our economic development program, and that is also institutionalized, if you will, within the recommendations of the budget. Most importantly, of course, and you know that I believe this, and I think it's a fundamental to our relationship, is following the council's policy goals. You established these policy goals after the last election as this council was seated, and we've institutionalized those policy goals into all of the work of the city, and importantly, again this year, into all of the recommendations we have in the budget. That is, if you will, the nexus of that leadership and administration. This is where it comes together. In my view, you set those policy goals, and we follow those goals. So just to briefly reiterate what you certainly all know, but for anyone who's viewing, community building, preserving and expanding the quality of life, enhancing current services, preserving our natural environment. Total planning is a concept in terms of how we operationalize your direction, how we build facilities for the public. Economic development is a top priority, and importantly, making sure that our leadership as a city in the Valley, in the state, certainly within the West Valley, the leadership is carried out in a fashion that is consistent with the policy direction and professionalism that you hold so high, and the integrity that the city is noted for. And as Chairman Ellis said in the last meeting, a city that is known for doing things the right way, and we're very proud of that. Always when we put together the budget, we come back to our financial foundations, those key pieces that really do set Peoria apart, so that when we have a financial calamity like we had a few years ago, we can weather the financial downturn as well or better than any city in the state and maybe within this part of the country. We have good policies and we follow those good policies, and that's what the first check mark there is, the comprehensive financial policies. That is something that we talk about regularly and we refer to. They're not just a nice policy document that we sit on the shelf, but we use those policies in how we manage, how you govern, and they're keys to how we put our budget together and manage our finances. As a part of that, an outgrowth is the strong funded reserves. We have excellent reserve funding, and that's not just so that we can say we've got nice reserves, right? That is so when there is a problem, when there is an emergency, we have the funds to fall back on so that we can manage through that without going into a crisis. Again, it's one of the reasons and one of the ways that we were able to move through the financial downturn a few years ago and bridge some of those real calamities that were occurring in the economy because we had good, well-funded reserves. And hand in glove with that are bond rating. Again, we don't have high bond ratings simply to say that we have them, although it's nice to say that we have them, but it helps us when we do go out to borrow funds. Having a good bond rating helps us get the best return on our investment. The cost of money is lower because we have a good bond rating, and that turns into financial savings and helps us spend the public's money in the most judicious way possible. We take that very seriously. It's the public's money. They've entrusted it to us to provide them with the key services that make the quality of life here what we know it to be, and we take that very seriously. So having a high bond rating helps us get the best rate when we need to go to the bond market. We always work within our financial means. That's important. We never go beyond what we can afford, and we never spend one-time revenue on reoccurring expenses. That's a key fundamental principle, and one of the reasons that some governments across the country get in trouble is when they start to spend one-time revenue on ongoing expenses, like people and operating expenses. We never do that. We take that seriously, and we always stay within our means. We also take a long-term perspective and a long view. As you know, we have a 10-year funded capital improvement program, and that is a tribute to that. Most cities don't have that. Some have 5 years, very few have 10 years. That is very important to taking that long view, and it's one of the reasons that we're able to stay ahead of the curve with great assets and facilities for our citizens that we can afford. And it's a contributing factor to that high quality of life. We also recognize the Peoria economy. Our economy is unique. Yes, it's part of the valley, it's part of the state, certainly the country, but it's also, there are specific elements within our local economy that make a difference to our revenue. And we pay attention to that, and we monitor that information very closely, and when it changes, we react to that. Again, how we managed through the downturn a few years ago, we reacted quick. We were out in front of some of the other governments because we were monitoring that data, and we jumped on it quickly, and that's because we know our local economy and we managed to what we see. So let me get down to a little more within the key themes and objectives within this budget. These are themes that you've seen in many past budgets, but they get to some of the points that are going to be more specifically addressed over the next week. We're maintaining our financial and fiscal integrity. We're enhancing public safety. This, as you know, from the mid-year adjustment, we added 2 uniformed police officers. And we began the move into emergency medical. We're continuing that in this budget, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. Economic development. There are funds here to continue the economic development priorities and projects that the council has identified. We're continuing our community-based service delivery. As you know, we talk about community-based in public safety. Community policing is the one we talk about most often, but community-based service delivery also shows up in the design of Community Park 3. We have community meetings. What does the public want to see in this facility? When we go out to do something in the business districts, whether it's P83 or in the auto district area, we go out to the affected population and public and say, what would you like to see from the city? And that's another part of community-based decision-making that's embedded within the budget recommendations you'll have before you. We're also expanding service growth. Happily, again, finally, we're seeing growth. You know, the floor fell out a few years ago and we weren't seeing any growth, and in fact, we had, several thousand folks out-migrate as they were losing their homes. We're now, that's all behind us, that's history. We're seeing some growth, particularly in the northern part of the city, and as you know from the mid-year adjustment where we responded to that growth with some additional personnel, we're continuing that in this budget. So we'll have some additional personnel and dollars set aside for growth. Maintaining our existing assets is another real important one to us. And we think about that in terms of the physical assets, but sometimes it's the IT assets, the information technology assets. So we have some investments, some one-time investment in this budget for some technology improvements that we have put off, frankly, making in the past because they did not reach a high enough priority against all of the other priorities of public safety and direct service delivery to our citizens. This year, we've waited as long as we can wait on those, and we've got some one-time dollars in for some of our technology investments as well. We also have funds here to maintain our stature as an employer of choice. It's been a policy direction of the council, and we certainly appreciate that, that we need to be able to compensate our employees in terms of their wages as well as their benefits so that we can attract and retain the excellent employees that we need to deliver the high-quality services that our citizens expect. And that's just a simple fact of life, and it's good management, and I appreciate that you support that, and we have funds in this budget to do that. And that allows us to do the great community customer service that we're noted for. And by having good employees that are happy in their work and serve the citizens with a sense of confidence allows us to get those high scores that we get when we do citizen surveys. The citizens appreciate that. And of course, last but absolutely not least, is keeping a low tax burden. That's real important to us. I know it's very important to mayor and council. It's certainly important to the staff as well. And we take very seriously that we are good stewards of the public's money. So let's talk a little bit about public safety. I mentioned that a minute ago. Community-oriented public safety is the credo, and that is embedded in everything that Chief Minter and the leadership and staff of the police department do. And I'm very pleased with how we have become such a well-regarded community-oriented police department. Continuing that addition of employees that we did in the mid-year, we're adding several more officers, police service assistants. We added officers in the mid-year. We're adding assistants, police service assistants in this budget, and that in the vernacular of policing is a force multiplier. By adding positions at this level, we can free up the officers' time so they can do more direct policing. This takes some of those duties that they now wind up doing that can be handled by people in these positions and frees them up to do more policing. As we talked about at the last study session, we also have a code enforcement officer in this budget. This is to help us with the expanded work effort that we see from the property maintenance code. So we have that individual in this budget as well. Now as we move into fire and emergency medical, This, as I mentioned a minute ago, operationalizes moving us into the ambulance service. So I'm very pleased that we are bringing on additional personnel for that, and Katie will go through these details in just a moment. And we also have something that we've not talked about much at the council table before, but it's something we've been spending time on in staff, and that's what we're calling active shooter situations. And you see that under fire and medical, and you think, well, gee, this is a police problem, right? Well, yes, it certainly is a police problem, but it's also a problem for our other first responders. Our fire medical personnel can find themselves in harm's way beyond just a fire or the calamity that they're dealing with. Sadly, we've seen cases around the country where they can get involved in active shooter situations as well, and we're focusing on that in this budget as well. It's one of those sad facts of life that we simply cannot ignore and have not been ignoring. On economic development, I mentioned that a moment ago, and I'll drill down on that a little bit here too. We're doing some community promotions. We've got some additional funds in there to continue doing marketing and community promotions in our economic development area. This is a big deal for taking these next steps later on in the agenda. Under my report, Scott White will give a presentation on the forum that we held last week, the Development Forum, and I know a number of you were able to attend that. A great event that really is helping put us on the map for additional economic investment, and that marketing and promotion is something that we're focusing on in spades in this budget as well. We're also continuing our land development consulting services. That was the work that got us to being able to have the Development Forum last week. We know there's more work out there, and so we're continuing that. The retail market study is one that will allow us to figure out how we can help fill vacant storefronts around the community. In different business districts, we still have vacant storefronts. In some cases, maybe we're a little overbuilt in the neighborhood commercial, and we want to try to figure out how can we fill that. And so this study is going to help give us some additional information about how we can target some marketing to help fill some of those vacant spaces around the community. The international business attraction piece, increasingly we're getting some attention from other parts of the world, Canada, Latin America, Asia, and this is to allow us to continue to capitalize on that interest and work with investors from different parts of the world. Small business development. We have a new idea for small business development. We had done some within the city. We had worked for a time with the Chamber of Commerce. We'd not been satisfied with the outcome of those efforts. We have a different approach that we're taking and contracting with a firm that has a great track record in this area, and we'll be talking more about that. We have funds in here to do that, and we believe that that's really going to meet your objectives to notch this up to something more than the City of Peoria has ever done in the past. And finally, the last item there is Lake Pleasant infrastructure study. And boy, that sounds nice and bureaucratic, right? But what that is a very focused effort to make sure that we're prepared to bring the infrastructure to the northern part of the city, particularly near Lake Pleasant, so that we can start to jumpstart development in that area, hopefully for a destination resort, and be ready for that in terms of our market preparedness for when the economic forces are such to enable that. The area that we call quality community is building on the successes that we've had in a number of the key programs that the council's comfortable with and supports from the past. It's our Community Works program, and this, just to remind everybody, this is the program that we have that has smaller capital improvement programs, not the big road projects, bridge projects, destination park projects, but it's the smaller neighborhood investments that mean a lot to those communities, where we can go in with some flexibility and some speed and do some things in communities that really benefit the residents within a small geographic area. It's a program that everybody loves, and we've got funds in there to keep that going. Similarly with neighborhood investments, and by that, it's all across the board. It's everything from paving streets to working on maintaining stormwater detention facilities, to keeping the landscaping up in all of the areas that the city owns and maintains, and we continue to focus on the little things, right? Sometimes it's the small things that mean the most to our residents and citizens in their neighborhoods, and we absolutely understand that. We're expanding, I mentioned earlier, we're seeing population growth. So we're expanding some of our recreation programs. We're seeing growth, we're responding to that, so we have some program increases in recreation, and some of our events are succeeding, and that's good, and we need some funds in there to help expand the special events and community promotions that our citizens are appreciating. We have a growth area in human services, and I know that's been a priority for the City Council. We talked about it last year, and we were trying to squeeze as much into last year's budget as we could, and I committed to make sure that I took a look at that this year to see if we could bring another position in, and we've been able to do that, and I'm quite confident that this will help meet the Council's goal in terms of improving our human services program. Also consistent with the Council goal, we have some funds in here to expand our partnership around the use of our Peoria Center for the Performing Arts. Changing up the contract there, allowing the city to take more control over the use and management of that building in concert with TheaterWorks, our prime tenant, who, as you know, is comfortable with the moves we're making and the evolution of that change, and so we have funds there to accomplish that, consistent with the Council's vision for the use of that building. And the last item on that list is some money, one-time money, to update the city's general plan. As the Council knows, that's a huge, important document for the city. It is, in fact, the blueprint for our city. It's up for amendment under state law, and we want to just not sort of tinker with it around the edges, but we want to step back and really work with you to make that document alive for the vision that you have for the community, and so we have significant funds there to make that happen. A few of the key capital projects. Community Park 3, and we're going to have to come up with a cool name for this pretty soon, because Community Park 3 sounds so dry. But it's a wonderful facility that has been accelerated, and we've had community meetings, and that is in the CIP moving forward. As the Council knows, the public safety facility at Pinnacle Peak has been approved and will be under construction soon, and that's going to improve our ability to serve the rapidly growing northern part of the city from a public safety standpoint. The economic development projects I mentioned are there. Also, a huge decision that the Council made last year was to expand our Pyramid Peak water treatment facility. The partnership we have with the City of Glendale, it's a benefit to Peoria, it's a benefit to Glendale, and it allows us to have ample water for the growth that we're seeing in the northern part of the city, and within our utility portion of the CIP, we have funds to make that whole expansion happen. Finally, in transportation, again, it's keeping up with growth and change. We're seeing Happy Valley Road between Lake Pleasant Parkway and the 303, that section where there's a bridge, there needs to be a parallel bridge to handle the traffic, both vehicular and pedestrian and bikes, and that is being accelerated as well. And also the last check there is some drainage and transportation work in the area of 67th, where we know we have some flooding problems, and we're on that and accelerating that as well. So finally, my last slide, and I'll turn it over to Katie. The budget is balanced. It supports all of the Council's goals and priorities. It maintains our core services. There are no tax increases. The only rate increase is that which you approved last year. The second phase of that gets implemented this year. We have a modest, ongoing, and one-time additions within the budget, and there are ample funds here to fund and actually accelerate some of the important capital projects for our city. So I'm real proud of the budget. I think you will be too when you get into it, and we're eager to talk about it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katie, and she'll do the
By the numbers.
By the numbers, right.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Wanted to just sort of go back to what Carl had said. Our principles of sound financial management really are our key document that we use and the policies that we follow when we're developing a budget. It does begin with those policies, and this slide kind of outlines the key budget guidelines that set the stage for developing the recommended budget that we're bringing forward to you this evening. Each year, we do update the the 5-year long-range forecast, and we incorporate both the revenue and expenditure estimates for all of the city's major operating funds. And this includes revenues that, as we talked about, are anticipated to be sustained or recurring over the 5-year forecast, and the known or anticipated ongoing expenditure requirements. We also ensure that we have met all of our reserve requirements and apply any balance above the reserve amount to one-time uses in future years. Really, there's two processes we go through in the development of the budget. That's our operating budget and our capital budget. The operating budget is really what manages our day-to-day, primarily supported through taxes, charges, and fees, where the capital budget, as you know, is supported. These are usually large one-time projects that are supported by a multitude of different types of financing sources for our capital program. The process. Here's my obligatory, flow chart of how we work through it. We start preparing forecasts in early August, and so it's pretty much a year-round process. Departments begin preparing their budget requests in the fall, and that is followed by a prioritization process, and a recommended budget then is brought forward to council for review. So by the numbers, this slide shows the history of the budget over the last 10 years. The total recommended budget for fiscal year 2017 is $497 million. That is a 2.74% decrease over the prior year. But when you break that down a little bit, you can see that the decrease really comes from our capital budget, and that's primarily due to the removal of the Peoria Sports Park program. If you recall, that was a $30 million project that we had in our capital improvement program. That has been removed. So that results in about a 22%, almost 23% decrease in the overall capital program from fiscal year 16. The dark green represents the city's total operating funds, $269 million, and of that, the general fund, which is our city's primary operating fund, makes up about $139.3 million of that, and that's about a 5.64% increase over last year's general fund amount. I want to take just a minute to do a quick financial overview of some of our major operating funds, and we'll start with the general fund. When we develop our 5-year forecast, the first thing we do is we look at our revenue. We look at our revenue sources, and there's a variety of different types of revenue sources that that support the general fund operations. And these revenues are influenced by a number of different factors. Some of them are economic factors. Some of them are folks who are interested in taking classes or building, those types of things. When we look at this pie chart, you can really see that a good share of our revenues comes from the state shared revenues and our local city sales tax revenues. And then we also receive fees and charges for services such as our recreation fees, our development services fees, engineering services, and those fees do help offset individual costs that help diversify our revenue base. So, we've got lots of different types. Also, you'll see in here in the general fund our internal services, such as our human resources department, our city attorney, and city clerk. So we charge out those services to the other operating funds that are not part of the general fund, and so they come back to the general fund as revenues that help support. And then you can see on here also property tax does not support our normal general fund day-to-day operations. Certainly property tax does help support debt service associated with our capital improvement program.
Katie, before you move on, would you mind telling everyone what is included in state shared revenue?
Yes, state shared revenues are the urban revenue sharing includes the sales taxes that the state collects. So when you look at your sales tax bill, you have a local city sales tax. You also have the state sales tax. That state sales tax is collected across the state and then redistributed out to the communities based upon our population. It includes HERF revenues, which actually doesn't go to the general fund, but does include that, as well as our urban revenue sharing, which is basically the income tax Again, cities don't have the ability to collect income tax that is collected at the state and then is redistributed out to the communities, again, based upon our population.
And HERF stands for Highway User,
Highway User Revenue Funds,
and
yes.
that's basically gas tax.
Yes, and those support a lot of our street operations and our street capital program.
Thank you.
When we look at our expenditures, when you look at this by service area in the general fund, you can see obviously, and you know, makes sense that a lot of our costs go to support our public safety efforts. Community services also makes up a significant portion. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of those have revenues that offset a lot of the expenditures associated with that. And then we have a number of our city's administrative services, as I mentioned before. And again, those are citywide services that we also allocate out the costs associated with those services, such as HR, the city attorney, the city manager's office. All of those get allocated out to departments as well.
And under community services would be parks and events and
Parks and events,
Programs.
library, you know, all of those recreation programs, all of our facilities are all included as part of that Rio Vista, you know, all of our major parks. And I don't think I broke it out in here separately, sports complex. Actually, I'm sorry, not in the general fund, not part of the community services, sorry. In the general fund, that has its own fund.
thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about our forecast. When we look at our forecast, we do this, again, we're looking at a 5-year planning period. We don't just look at the next year. And these green bars that you see on here represent the ongoing commitments that we have. So these are the expenditures, the ongoing commitments that we have. There is some moderate expenditure growth that we would normally see, and you can see it on here, and that's primarily driven by personnel costs such as compensation, employee health benefits, retirement contributions, those things that we know we have to fund year over year. Council has included in this, or council has approved, and we've included in this all of the compensation packages that have been approved with our 4 labor groups, so that's included in here as well as commensurate amounts, as Carl had mentioned, for our non-represented employees. We also include in these green bars those costs that we know are associated with major capital projects that are planned within the 5-year period. And an example of that, I think I've used this before, is bringing on the Northern Community Park. We know there's going to be operating impacts associated with that. We need to plan for those well before they come online so that we're not at a point when it comes online that we don't have the revenues to support that. So we plan for that early. When you overlay that with the revenue projections, these are what we consider the recurring revenues. And there is a distinction there when we talk about recurring revenues versus one-time revenues. Every time we look at our revenue sources, we do have certain types of revenues that we use as our base revenue that we're going to be receiving that go towards our structural balance that you see here. We also know that there are from year to year some one-time revenues that we receive. Construction sales tax above a base amount is kind of considered our biggest category of one-time revenues that we receive on a year-to-year basis. We would use that towards one-time allocations, whereas we would use the base as part of this structural. There is a slight gap. I know I say this every year and nobody seems to be able to see it, but there is a slight gap between those that line and those green bars. And this year that was about $1.6 million that was available for us to support some of the ongoing requests that you'll see in the budget next week as we go through that. When we look at our one-time analysis, again, like I said, these are one-time revenues that are available from either, it could be prior year savings, it could be revenues that are above our expected base revenue, it could be one-time revenues that maybe we've received through reimbursements or recoveries of some sort, and those then become available for one-time uses. So in the recommended budget that we're presenting this evening, you can see how we're planning to utilize those one-time revenues. Some will go to our CIP. There's about $1 million to be available for those repair and replacement projects. Those are good items to use one-time revenues on because you know, they're not an ongoing, sometimes it's an ongoing need, but those we understand. But for a lot of these are like shade structures for you know, parks and things like that that you have to replace from time to time. Our Community Works program, as Carl mentioned, a very successful program, those smaller neighborhood improvements. And then we had about $4.4 million available in one time to be used for the department requests. However, there's an asterisk on this one because one of the major items that's included in that 4.4 is the city's certificate of necessity and the taking on the ambulance services. As we discussed with council, we have one-time upfront costs in terms of getting that program started and implementing that program. So about $2.5 million of that is part of the certificate of necessity. Switching to the half-cent sales tax fund, expenditures for the half-cent sales tax fund are really, expenditures, what we spend that money on is really set by your council policy, and we spend that within the council policy guidelines on things such as operational functions that include public safety, economic development, and sports complex. It also supports development agreement payments and debt service payments on the City Center for Performing Arts and the recent sports complex improvements that have been completed. And then per council's direction, this fund is identified primarily for economic development purposes. So as we go forward, the proposed budget includes funding for some operational support associated with economic development and their various programs and initiatives that they're going to be bringing forward. There is, as we've shared with council, some capacity in this fund to do some capital or, when I say capital, one-time projects and or operating type projects that are in support of your council objectives for economic development. In terms of our enterprise funds, 2017 budget does include the second year of a 2-year rate adjustment for water, wastewater, and reclaimed water rates. We don't propose any changes to our solid waste rates. However, we do see that there may be some significant changes to the commercial solid waste market associated with some changes in some legislation that will be coming into play this year. So we'll want to spend some time evaluating what that's going to mean to our commercial solid waste services, and I'm sure we will be bringing much of that information back to this council later in the upcoming year to share with you kind of how that's shaking out and what that means to the overall commercial solid waste operations. And then lastly, the city is considering some options for developing a stormwater utility. This would generate an amount that would be appropriate for dealing with some of the expanded, the MPDES Phase 2 permits that the city has, that we are required to provide some expanded compliance in our stormwater and some mandates that we're going to have to meet in the upcoming years as part of that permit that we have. So we're looking to evaluate some of the options and again, bring that back to council with some of the recommendations that we have and think through that. Okay. Carl loves that he knows a lot about stormwater, so. Probably spent too much time, right? I want to talk a little bit about the FTE changes that are in the budget. We are proposing a 30.25 new FTEs as part of the recommended budget. This does not include those FTEs that were included as part of the mid-year. Go through that real quickly on public safety. It does include, however, 16 positions that are here to support the taking on the ambulance services for the upcoming year. So that would include 14 firefighters, 7 of which I think we mentioned earlier would be paramedics. The fire captain, who's going to work with the emergency medical services area, and some administrative support that they're going to need for billing and those types of things that we're going to be involved in heavily going forward. Police is receiving 3 positions, including as we mentioned, the police service assistants, 2 police service assistants, and what that really does, as Carl was saying, is free up some of the PSOs. So we have PSAs, and then we have PSOs. PSOs are police service officers, and those are the ones who are really out in the field with the officers, with the patrol officers, helping with traffic, situations, helping with some of the non-person crimes that might be going on, that, taking some of the reporting on that, doing the transports that need to be done. So what that really does in terms of force multipliers is allows our patrol officers to spend more time on the more high priority elements and duties that they need to be working on. So those are in there, as well as a code compliance officer to help support some of the efforts that we have in areas where we have vacant properties and properties that have been impacted by fire and things like that. So that's 19 FTE. 5.25 FTE are in what I would call the operations area, and this again are to support those areas that are really, as Carl mentioned, we're seeing growth in the community, but we're also experiencing increases in our operations in areas where those demands for services, because of that growth, is now requiring us to do some additions in those areas. So 5.25 positions there. And then finally, we have 6 positions that we are recommending to support our utility operating divisions, and these, again, would be supported through utility rates. Back to the capital improvement program real quick. I wanted to just share this. This kind of gives a bird's eye picture of our 10-year capital improvement program and where we're really focusing. Again, water, wastewater, and streets take on the lion's share of any capital program. Those are our major items of infrastructure. The capital budget for 2017 is $130.6 million. And while I talked earlier that that's a 22% decrease over last year, it really is due again to that major project. So you see the economic development piece slightly lower. The total 10-year capital program is $605.5 million. So we've got a pretty robust 10-year plan out there. I'm not going to go into all these details again, but there are some, we are going to go through during the budget sessions. We're going to spend some time on the capital improvement program and some of the changes to that. Some of the notable projects in the plan would be obviously the funding for the design and construction of Community Park 3. Some of the important transportation projects that are in there include, as we mentioned before, Happy Valley Road widening, the Lake Pleasant Parkway sidewalks, the 75th Avenue intersection improvements, the 91st Avenue and Mountain View to Grand improvements. So there's a number of really good, as well as a couple of trailheads, one at 99th and Olive and one at 83rd and Village Parkway. So those are some highlights, kind of things to kind of get you ready for next week's presentation. Andy will go into much more detail on those and provide you with all the information you need there. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit, 2 housekeeping items. One is the schedule for what we plan to do next week, and then also some changes to the book that I just want to very briefly go over. The schedule next week is that we're going to make an attempt. We're going to go ahead and front load a lot of this, and we're going to put all of the major departments, all the departments, excuse me, on Monday. We may get through all of them. If we don't get through all of them, we can move those to Wednesday, but Wednesday will be the capital improvement program. So this is generally in the order. You'll have that order in your book as well for you to read ahead if you'd like to read ahead. And lastly, as far as your council budget book, just want to let you know that we are giving you a hard copy this evening. You don't have to take that with you if you don't want. We can certainly bring it to your office. We will transmit an electronic copy to your email, so you'll not only get the budget book as you see here, but then we also have taken out and have separated out the detail book, so we'll have that as a separate book. And then all of this will be available on the city's website beginning tomorrow if there's any need to find it there. Couple of changes to the budget book. As you can see, it's a little bit smaller than it has been in prior years. Hopefully it's easier to carry. The major changes in here are that we included some additional summaries in here of some of the major areas, such as financial planning, our budget summary, all these types of things. So a little more reading in terms of some information, but I think it's good quality information about our policies, things like that, that kind of can give you some background and context. We also have taken out the line item detail from this budget. So this doesn't include, if you remember in the past, we had that line item detail. We've removed that. We'll have that as a separate document. You can have, it will be transmitted electronically to you. We can get you a hard copy if you like, but again, those are, you know, the big thick pieces, and I think that this will provide you all the information you need for your discussions on the budget in the upcoming week.
And let me just add, those changes were reflective of comments that we heard from you last year in terms of improvements. So each year we're trying to make it the documents as usable as possible, and we know that can be a challenge.
And quality is not measured in the number of pages, that's for sure, right?
Right. That's right.
Council, any questions? I just have one question or a clarification. Would you please just inform us as to what enterprise funds we have and how those operate?
Right, so we have our utility enterprise funds, our water, wastewater, and our reclaimed water. Those are the 3 on the water side. We also have residential solid waste, which includes our recycling, as well as commercial solid waste. So those are 2 on the solid waste side. So those are our enterprise funds. Enterprise funds operate similarly to what a business operates. So they have rates that support not only the operating but the capital requirements associated with those funds and those services. They also have financial policies associated with those that we follow as well. So when we're developing budgets and we're looking at the rate forecasts, it's taking into context all of those financial policies that have been approved as well. So they operate like a business.
And Mayor, let me add to that, and I know you're aware of this, but just to remind anybody that might be less familiar, that might be watching, we have, in essence, firewalls around these enterprise funds. We don't spend, say, water or wastewater utility funds outside of those utilities. We don't subsidize general fund activities with utility funds. That's one of those principles of sound financial management that we take really sacred, and it's one of those things that matters a lot in terms of the integrity of how we manage the public's money.
Good, thank you very much for that. Any questions? No? Okay.
Well, as always, if you have questions, call us anytime. We're happy to help, and we'll be getting into this in a little more detail on Monday night. So, Mayor, that concludes the study session items we have this evening.
Thank you. Then we are adjourned until our 7 p.m. meeting.